Hi, I'm Mark Baer. You're watching YourTown television program. I'm with Jeffrey Munks. This is the second segment. We've just had the birth of Language Line, and now what happens next?
Thank you, Mark. So by 1989, I had targeted the 88 largest cities in the nation to bring Language Line into. We were still a bootstrap operation. We didn't have enough money to be able to do a big marketing campaign or a big advertising campaign. But I knew the need existed because I had traveled the country and seen the impact of refugee resettlement on those 88 largest cities, which spanned the nation. And I figured if I could get the service into their 911 centers and their major hospitals, the word would spread virally within those communities, and we'd start to get reference accounts off of referrals and recommendations. And that's exactly what happened. In the course of about a year and a half, I was able to sell it into Miami Metro-Dade, New York City, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle, Philadelphia, Houston, Dallas, San Diego, Los Angeles, Chicago, the 88 cities that we had targeted. AT&T found out about us through that network of clients. They showed up one day and started a conversation that resulted in 1 year later, in August to October timeframe of 1989, we were acquired lock, stock, and barrel by AT&T and became AT&T Language Line Services. I quit my job as a San Jose police officer at that point. I had been working my 3 days off every week on Language Line, and the other 4 days I was pushing a patrol car around San Jose. But the acquisition enabled me to leave law enforcement and jump in full-time to run marketing, sales, product management, and communications for AT&T Language Line Services. In the next 5 years, using the resources that AT&T made available, we were able to grow the business more than 4,000%. We wound up in every single hospital in the U.S., the vast majority of the 911 centers, most of the public utility companies. So if you were a Hmong speaker in Pittsburgh and you smelled gas in your house, you now had the way to communicate that fact to the Pittsburgh, gas and power company, and they were able to dispatch the right resources to you. And if you were a Ukrainian immigrant in Manhattan and you saw a crime on the street, when you dialed 911, that dispatcher in New York City could touch a button on his console, which would speed dial Monterey, request a Ukrainian interpreter. The Ukrainian interpreter might be in Bozeman, Montana. Didn't matter where they were. They'd be connected between the immigrant on the streets in Manhattan and the dispatcher in the 911 center. They'd be able to tell the dispatcher what kind of emergency it was, what the suspect looked like, which way he was headed. And now, for the first time ever, 911 center in Manhattan no longer had to dispatch a fire truck, a paramedic, and a cop, not knowing whether it was a fire, a heart attack, or a crime. They could send the right resource to exactly the right location, knowing exactly what the circumstances were. That started happening nationwide, so it became a resource force multiplier that dramatically reduced the resources that were being expended by our public safety personnel and assured that the right resources were sent to the right place at the right time. It was a beautiful thing.
I love the story you told me about the guy from Texas calling Saudi Arabia. So kind of how this happened.
Sure, yeah. I think that was one of the sparks that led AT&T to our door.
So just the serendipity of this.
Yeah, there was a businessman in Dallas who had regular dealings in the oil industry with a colleague in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And he had a heck of a time actually getting the guy on the phone, because he would dial Saudi Arabia. He couldn't get through. He'd dial the AT&T international operator. She'd lead the call to Riyadh, and she couldn't get through. And they'd just wind up hearing the same message over and over again. The businessman in Dallas got so upset and so frustrated that he actually wound up physically threatening the operator. That scared the operator. She called her supervisor, and the supervisor called the Dallas Police Department. At the 911 center, they said, don't call us with this problem. Call Language Line in Monterey. And they gave the operator service center our phone number. The phone rang. It was AT&T, and they said, "Is it true that you guys can put an interpreter into a phone call and lead call completion to another country?" And we said, "Yeah, we do it on a regular basis." So they did it. They got that oil businessman in Dallas, brought him to us over the phone. We led the call to Riyadh with an interpreter on the line, and found out that what he had been listening to and AT&T had been listening to was a recorded message that said, "Call back when you have an interpreter." Well, we did. So we were able to complete the call. The businessman got to his contact. They got their business taken care of. And the AT&T service center said, "Whoa, we've got our hands on something here." And the message percolated, and we wound up getting checked out and then eventually acquired by AT&T. But, for all the years and all of the growth, and I mentioned, better than 4,000% growth along the way, these brilliant, gifted souls who populate Language Line here in Monterey also earned a Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award and a California Golden State Award as the best service company of any size in the state of California. It truly is a magical group of people doing phenomenal work for the community writ large. And I used to cruise the comm center, which was filled with answer points who were taking calls from every domain, from everywhere in the world, and connecting interpreters to help people communicate across the barrier imposed by language. One day a flag went up at one of the answer point stations, and we had little flags on flagpoles. And if a very interesting, bizarre, or difficult call was coming in, the answer point would pull the flag up. So I went over and I plugged in to listen to what was going on. And this is exactly what I heard. A female caller from a small town in Connecticut had called Language Line and had said, "I read about your service in our local paper. Our senior center subscribed so that recent arrival immigrants who are elderly can gain access to city services." And I thought, whoa, they can get an interpreter over the phone? And she said, I'm not an AT&T customer, but I'm wondering if I can use your service to find out if my mother is still alive. And the woman said, "When World War II ended, I was 8 years old. My father had been killed in the war. Our village had been destroyed. I lived with my mother and my aunt, her sister. And I remember I was sick and so were they. And one day they took me to the train station. They gave me to an American military family of the occupation. And I was brought to America, to Connecticut. I was raised American. I am American. I speak only English. I love my country. I love my family. I love my life. But I remember my mother. And when I read about your service, I thought, if she's still alive and if I can get an interpreter and make a phone call, maybe I can find her." So we took the woman's original family name, the name of her village on the outskirts of Tokyo. We reached into the system and got the next available Japanese interpreter who happened to be up in Bellevue, Washington, briefed the interpreter, led the call to Tokyo Operator Services, gave the family's last name and the name of the village, and all of a sudden the phone was ringing. And when it was answered by this 58-year-old Connecticut Japanese-American woman's aunt.
Wow.
And the two of them had this emotional, tear-filled 20-minute reunion over the phone through our interpreter. And during the conversation, the woman, the aunt, told this woman, she said, "The day we took you to the train station, we had been talking about how we knew you wouldn't live if we kept you. There was no food, there was no medicine. The reconstruction hadn't even started yet. We were destitute. We were all sick. When we got back home after giving you to that American family, we looked at each other and we knew we had made a mistake. So we ran back to the train depot, but you were gone. Since that day, your mother started saving her money, and after 5 years, she had enough to fly to America to look for you. Every 5 years since that time, she has flown to America to look for you. And as we speak, She's in New York City looking for you. The aunt gave us the phone number of the hotel where the mother was basing her 5-year search. We broke the line to Tokyo, kept the same interpreter in Bellevue on, led the call to the hotel in New York City. The mother answered the phone. So the mother in New York City, through the interpreter in Bellevue, Washington, is talking to her daughter who's in Connecticut for the first time in 50 years. And there's another 20-minute joyful, tear-filled reunion facilitated by nothing more complex than an interpreter and a telephone.
My God.
Mark, I can't tell you how many Japanese, German, and Italian children of that war who were displaced by the war reconnected with family through Language Line. So, we can talk about saving lives in hospitals, we can talk about changing attitudes in law enforcement, we can talk about all of the, big picture things that service enables, but that one-on-one human interaction and connection is the thing that, touches my heart. Like, if I never do anything else in life, that was enough.
So this is the heart of entrepreneurship. It's not about making $1 skillion. That's all something else, but it's about impact.
Yeah.
And you've created impact. Let's move on to some of the other pieces, Arista Knowledge Systems.
Okay. I left Language Line in about 1996, and I took a fascinating assignment here at CSU Monterey Bay. I had been on one of Leon Panetta's Tiger teams when the base was closed. He paired business people with politicians. And in my case, I was paired with Barbara Shipnuck, who was a supervisor for the county at the time. And the tasking he gave to all of us is vision. I want you to envision, what do we do with this footprint, Fort Ord, when it's closed? And this was well before the university was envisioned. Well, somebody came up with the idea of the 21st campus for the 21st century in the CSU system, and we all just went, yeah, that's it. So we all threw our time, talent, and energy into helping make that vision a reality. And when it became a reality, I called up the first provost, a guy named Steve Arvisu. And I said, look, you don't know me from Adams off Ox, but I work here in a local business. I'd love to talk to you about what you're going to do with this university. And he said, well, I'd love to talk to you. I can give you a half an hour at 7:30 on Monday morning. So he came over to my office at Language Line, 7:30 on a Monday morning for a half an hour. At 5:30 that night, he was still there. We had paper, the big easel pad paper, all over the walls in my office, and we were still going nuts with ideas. And when we finally ran out of gas, he said, would you be interested in getting involved in this venture? And I said, sign me up. So I became one of the early employees there, and I took a position reporting to Steve as the director of something called EduVenture Projects. And my job was to reach up to Silicon Valley, bring technology providers down, and get them interested in becoming involved by contributing not only products and technology, but their brain power as well, to this place that was supposed to be a technological innovation, almost incubator. Well, while I was doing that work, I came up with an incubatable idea, and it was based loosely on what I had done with Language Line, with a model that we had crafted, which was make it possible to bring any language, anywhere, anytime, to resolve any issue. And I wanted to apply that same philosophy or schema to learning. Now, at the time, in the late 90s, e-learning was a phrase that if you uttered it, most people would say, huh? What are you talking about? But I had been not only watching the nascent industry of e-learning, I had been participating in it. And one of the things that struck me was the companies that were out there in the marketplace, companies like Digital Think and Saba and Skillsoft and others, they all built these monolithic standalone structures called learning management systems. So if you wanted to use Skillsoft courseware, you had to buy their LMS, or Learning Management System. And if you bought their system, it was an ironclad concrete monolith that you couldn't let anything else into. So you're limited to just using Skillsoft courseware for your employees. If Digital Think put out a killer program, courseware, you couldn't run it. You had to go buy their LMS, and I thought, wrong, not a good. So I envisioned middleware, a type of software that would translate the differences between competing learning management systems. So you could buy Saba's LMS, and if you saw a good Digital Think program, you could use our middleware to normalize the differences and get it to report apples, oranges, and pomegranates all as bananas. So it was, technical interoperability was the idea. I went to the nation's only publicly traded venture capital firm, Safeguard Scientifics, in Wayne, Pennsylvania, made a pitch to them. They bought the idea and funded my idea. And we started Arista Knowledge Systems in 1997 with $4 million in venture capital, committed to the idea of normalizing the difference between competing learning management systems. And I built that business up in Silicon Valley, but since I had been on the campus at CSUMB as their employee, when I got the idea, I gave them a founder's share of stock. And I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do, but I also thought, I want this university to have a vested interest in the success of my venture. So if it does well, we can turn around and have a university partner to work on research and development, recruiting interns, and hopefully create a pipeline for employees in the form of their graduates in their various programs. And it worked.
And then the story goes on and on and on. But before we leave, I just want to talk about having a pencil and a pad of paper.
Oh, sure. When I was 16 years old, I was confused and concerned, as this was 1968, and if you can think back that far, our college campuses, many of them were burning, so were some of our cities. There were a lot of riots, a lot of contentious confrontations, and I had grown up in a town where the cops were my baseball coaches as volunteers. They were a great group of people. I admired and respected them, and I knew that they didn't have hatred in their heart. Yet on Friday nights, it was not uncommon down at Lytton Plaza in downtown Palo Alto to see a line of cops catching rocks and bottles from a line of students, many of whom I knew. And I knew the students didn't have hatred in their heart. I knew the cops didn't either. And I didn't possess the ability to comprehend and understand what this conflict was all about. I shared that confusion with my dad. He said, "Why don't you write your congressman?" So I did. I wrote a letter to Charlie Goobser. And a week or two later, I got a letter back. And it said, "Young man, you have an appointment with Captain Guy Wathen at the Palo Alto Police Department on January 18th, 1968. Show up in a suit with a tie." I had one suit and one tie. I put them on January 18th, which happened to be my birthday. I showed up at the Palo Alto Police Department and introduced myself to Guy Wathen. He sat me down and we had about a 3-hour conversation. And it was phenomenal. I mean, it covered the waterfront. One of the things he said that actually impacted and influenced my career choice was he said the average metropolitan cop has between 50 and 200 contacts with the public in a given week. That's 50 to 200 opportunities to make a positive contribution, a positive impact, and leave a positive impression that builds the relationship and the fabric between the police and the community. And that was a very profound thing for a 16-year-old kid to hear. And he told me, if you feel the same way about life in general when you're 18 as you do today, come and see me. I'm going to hire you. I said, okay. And he said, before you go, I want to ask you to do something. For the rest of your life, no matter what you do, always carry a pencil and a piece of paper, the means to capture ideas. And I think I probably looked at him quizzically and may have asked him why. And he said he firmly believed that everyone on the planet had the ability and the opportunity to come up with an idea that could change things for the better, make a positive difference in their world or the world. And the difference between those who do and those who don't make those contributions is often as simple is having the means to capture the idea. And from that moment on, I've never been without the means to capture ideas. And I do. I capture them. I either record them or I write them down. And often it's in the middle of the night when I'm subconsciously doing a lot of my thinking. So I'll wake up and I'll write a note. And that's how Language Line came into being. That's how I wound up waking up the next day and seeing that piece of paper that said, put it in the network. I don't think Language Line would have happened had it not been for Guy Wathen in 1968 giving me that little free piece of advice that has had a profound impact on my life.
Mark Baer, YourTown Television, Jeffrey Munks.
Thank you, Mark.
What a pleasure.